Hi, and welcome to How to Plan a Family Bike Trip. My name is Sarah Hunter, and I'd like to thank Adventure Cycling Association for hosting this presentation. They are a nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering people to travel by bicycle, and they've certainly accomplished that with me and my family. We've been on 6-week-long trips over the years, and so I'll start by telling you a little bit about each of those trips, and then I'll talk about how we got started, how we go about planning our trips, some tips we've learned along the way, and hopefully you can leave here with some ideas of your own. So our first trip was in Prince Edward Island in 2016, and we biked from one end of the island to the other on rail trails and back roads and along the ocean. And it was a beautiful trip and a truly successful first trip that set the stage for the rest of our adventures. And then the following spring, the boys and I drove out to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we biked the Great Allegheny Passage down to Cumberland, Maryland, the Gap Trail. And that's a 150-mile rail trail. So there was no navigation involved. We just followed this lovely trail. And we stayed at B&Bs along the way, and it was terrific. And then the following summer, my husband and the boys and I drove to Burlington, Vermont, and we biked up through the islands and into Canada and went to Montreal. And we stayed in Montreal for a few days exploring the city, and then we biked back. And when we got to the US, we biked back onto the New York side of the border and then followed Lake Champlain down and then took a ferry back to Burlington. It was about a 225-mile ride altogether, and it was another spectacular trip. And then the following April, the boys and I picked up where we left off on the Gap Trail, where the Gap Trail ends in Cumberland, Maryland. The C&O towpath begins, and that goes all the way to DC. So we biked from Cumberland, Maryland to DC. That was 185 miles. And that trip was our first camping trip. So we carried quite a bit more gear. Our first 3 trips, we stayed at B&Bs or hotels, so we didn't have to carry very much. And then our final 3 trips, we camped. And so the first time we carried quite a bit of gear, and then we pared it down on subsequent trips. The following summer, we started in Down East Maine and biked up into Canada, and then took a ferry to Grand Manan in the Bay of Fundy and stayed on Grand Manan for a few days, and then took the ferry back, retraced our steps a little bit, and then kind of island hopped back to Down East Maine. And that was our longest trip. It was 8 days, again, all camping, and really, really beautiful. And then that led us to Canyonlands National Park the following spring. We biked the White Rim Trail. It's a 100-mile loop trail through Canyonlands, and there's no water or services of any kind. And so for 3 days and 100 miles, we carried all the water that we needed and all the food and gear. And it was a really amazing trip. And we never would have imagined years ago that we would embark on something like that. One adventure truly does lead to the next. So why do this? Before we started bike touring, our vacations always involved camping and day hikes and day bicycle rides on rail trails, gravel paths, back roads. But we always came back to the same place. And by the time the boys were 12 and 13, we got the sense that they were sort of losing interest in these trips, and that if we wanted to keep their interest in our family vacations, we needed to make them a little bit more adventurous. And so we did, and we accomplished that with bike trips, because bike trips are adventurous. You never know what's going to happen. And they build grit along the way too. It's tough when you have to bike up a hill in the rain, and you learn to dig deep, and it's a good thing. We've also loved these because we've learned to work as a team. it's different than being at home when you always go off on different directions, work and school and sports. But when you're on a bike trip, you're working together towards a shared goal, and it's a really terrific thing to experience as a family. And it's also truly wonderful to see what it's like to travel without a car. We live in the country and we're 10 miles from the nearest grocery store, so we use our car a lot. And it's really, really lovely to just leave it behind and travel without it, with everything that you need in your panniers. It's really, really great and so much fun. So our first trip was great, and I really recommend spending some time thinking about the first trip. And you don't want to go too big because you don't want to make it overly difficult, but you also don't want to. You want it to be adventurous. So I would recommend going moderately big. I felt like I struck the right balance for our family with the Prince Edward Island trip. It was tough, but it wasn't too tough. It was about 40 miles a day, spread out over 5 days. We were all exploring this new place together. We went inn to inn and we didn't carry much gear. And here we're not carrying any gear at all because the innkeeper that we stayed in the inn that we stayed in that night, the people that owned it, they wouldn't let us carry our gear the next day because it was supposed to rain, torrential downpours. And they said, no, we're just going to bring your gear to the next B&B. And they wouldn't even let us say no. They just put it in their car. They're just so nice in PEI. This trip was also the only one that we used a shuttle service for. We used George Larder guide and drive service. And so we left our car at his house and he drove us to North Point, and then 5 days later picked us up at East Point. And the great thing about this was if we had run into trouble along the way, George would have helped us out. And so for our first trip, it was really great to have like a lifeline. And we didn't use it, and it let us feel more confident about future trips when we didn't have it. So we always start with talking about how long we want to ride, how many days, do we want to go on paved roads or dirt paths, do we want to camp or stay indoors? And we found that as far as the amount of miles that we ride each day, 40 is a pretty good number for us for on roads or sort of gravel paths. The White Rim Trail, we rode about 30 miles a day on that trail, and that was a struggle to ride 30 miles a day. And it was because it was on dirt, really hilly landscape, and we carried a lot of gear. The water weight added quite a bit. So those three things added to the equation: the surface that you're riding on, how much weight you have, and how hilly it is. But 40 miles is very doable. We've done 60 miles a day on some trips on roads, and that's also doable. So once we sort of get a little bit of an idea about what we want to do, then you can start to do some research. And the first place I go to is Adventure Cycling Association because they have tons of great resources. They have family tours you can just sign up for if you want to just take the planning completely out of it. But you could also use those tours as sort of a guide of something you might want to do. They have routes and maps all designed as like a choose your own adventure. You can purchase the maps. They have apps for them, and some of them are also paper maps. And it's all mapped out for you on safe bike routes. If you want to do shorter trips, the Bike Your Park and Bike Travel Weekends are great resources on their website. Those are broken down by state, and so people who participate in these weekend adventures, they can post what they're doing and their route, and so you can sort of go to the state that you're interested in biking in, see what people are doing for overnights, 1 or 2 night overnights. And similarly, the bikeovernights.org is a great blog that they host that has similar shorter trips Bikepacking.com is for dirt and gravel, and that's where we found the White Rim Trail adventure. Again, a deep rabbit hole that you go down as soon as you start looking at this site. So I recommend a rainy Sunday afternoon for sure. Rails to Trails Conservancy is excellent. I also like to use the Bicycle Coalition of Maine. They have a big bike ride every year called Bike Maine, and they post the route on their website, and they also post all past year's routes on their website. So it's great to be able to look at an established route and see if it's something that you might want to use as is or modify. Routeverte.com is also an excellent resource for Canada, and we use that for our Quebec trip. Google Maps is also just terrific. Use the bike function, and you can really dig in there and map your ride well. So once you sort of find a route that you're interested in pursuing, then there's some details that you want to work out. You want to search for the lodging and food available along the way, find out where you could possibly stay. We've stayed at bike-friendly B&Bs and hostels and campgrounds and backcountry sites. We've never stayed with a warm shower host, but we've hosted warm shower guests, which has been really, really fun. A great way to meet other cyclists and learn about their adventures. We are located on the tail end of the northern tier route that you can find on the Adventure Cycling Association website. And so we've been able to host quite a few people who are on the last few days of their cross-country adventure, which is really, really cool. A really fun thing to do. You want to think about where you're going to leave your car and how you'll get back to it if you're biking point to point. For our first trip, we used George, the shuttle service there, and you might be able to find a shuttle service where you're going to bike. For other trips where we haven't had that option, we've used Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and we did that for the Gap Trail and the C&O Trail. So we actually drove down to the end point of our trip, found a safe place ahead of time to leave our car, biked to Enterprise Rent-A-Car, rented a minivan, and put all 3 bikes on those trips. It was my boys and I. So we put the 3 bikes in the back of the minivan, drive to the start of where we're going to bike, drop the car off at Enterprise Rent-A-Car there, and then bike to the starting point, and then bike back to your car. And that's worked out well. It's been a pretty affordable way to figure out a way to logistically get back to your car. And then if you're flying somewhere, if it's a far away destination, you need to think about, are you going to bring your own bike and ship it or fly with it, or if you're going to rent out there. The only trip that we did this on was the Canyonlands National Park trip, and we chose to rent bikes because it ended up being more affordable than shipping them or flying with them. So once you found the route that you're planning, and you've worked out where you're staying and how you're getting back to your car, include some 0 or Nero days. These are backpacking terms. We've done this on 2 trips. The Burlington to Montreal trip, we spent a couple days in Montreal and just biked around the city, and we didn't put any serious miles on those days. We were just exploring the city. And then also on Grand Manan, we had a day where we just hiked. They have some very beautiful trails there. And so these trips are not about crushing the miles. And it's nice to take a break from your bike now and then, especially when you're on a long trip. And it's great to plan side trips too, to and from your ride if you have a long drive. When we've done that on our 2 long drives, at the end of the C&O trip, we ended in DC, and we planned ahead of time to have a meet and greet with our senator and a tour of the Capitol. And that was really terrific. It was a great way to end our trip. It was fun to bike to the Capitol, and it was interesting. The boys hadn't been there since they were younger, and it was a great way to end that amazing adventure. And then on our way home from the Gap Trail, we had to drive from Cumberland, Maryland back to Maine, and we took a slight detour and went to Scranton, Pennsylvania, and visited the Steamtown Mall because we were huge fans of The Office. And that was a neat thing to do. It was really fun. These are vacations, so take advantage of seeing things that you wouldn't otherwise have an opportunity to see. So once you have your itinerary, you know where you're going, you've planned your 0 or 0 days, maybe some side trips. It's a great idea to share your plan with the local bike shop or a bike club for advice and suggestions. Cyclists love to brag about the great cycling in their area, so feel free to capitalize on that, and you could learn some really great tips. I did that on our Grand Manan trip, and I learned about this great St. Andrew's Trail, and I don't think I would have found it otherwise, and it saved us some road time, and it led us along these beautiful ponds, and it was really a great addition to our trip, and I'm glad that I asked. And then, of course, review the final plan with your family, and always leave a copy with somebody else who's not on the trip. So help build enthusiasm with gear. I am usually planning these trips about 6 months out, so there's usually plenty of gift-giving opportunities along the way. And so take advantage of it and ask the kids what they want, what they need, what would make them feel more comfortable on the trip. Small things like bike gloves can make a big difference, and bike shorts definitely, and bright shirts. If they don't have bright shirts, get them. And helmets, of course. I can't stress enough the importance of a good helmet that fits well. So if maybe they've outgrown their helmet, take a look, bring them to a bike shop and have it fitted. Bike lights, absolutely. They might not need that when you're doing rides around home, but you might think, oh, I don't need a bike light because I'm not going to be biking in the dark, but it gets foggy, rainy, you need bright bike lights, absolutely. And panniers or bags. So we use these panniers a lot, and they're great. They're not waterproof, but we keep our things in clear Ziploc bags, which is really handy because you can see everything that's inside, and it's waterproof. I won't talk too much about packing because it really depends on if you're camping or if you're not camping, but I just want to mention organization. When you're on a bike trip, it is important to know where things are that you might need access to quickly. And really the only two things that you need quick access to while you're on the ride usually is your food and your first aid kit. And other stuff can get buried, the extra clothes and stuff like that. But if you're running low and you need a Snickers, you can't be unloading everything to find that Snickers that is somewhere at the bottom of your bag. You should have it handy, and likewise have that first aid kit handy too. This is also the time that you might want to assess your camping gear if you're camping, and use it as an opportunity to get lighter gear a little bit at a time. It all adds up, and it's fun to start to sort of upgrade your gear. Every trip that we've been on is an opportunity to upgrade something. You certainly do not need a new bike. Any bicycle that you have can be the bike that you take on your bike trip. But if you want to use it as an excuse to get a new bike, that's also a possibility. We generally use, this is a Trek that my son uses, and this other one, I forget what that one is, but they have similar tires where they're not road bike tires, but they are good for a combination of road and gravel, and sort of, because you end up encountering dirt roads almost always, and so you don't always expect to. But also, if you have a road bike and that's one that you're comfortable with, and you don't expect to be on any dirt for any substantial period of time, then bring the bike that you love, and the one you're comfortable on. Know your family skills. When we did our first bike trip in PEI, I think we would have been hard pressed to fix a flat. We've certainly since learned to do that. But it's a good idea to sort of familiarize yourself with some basic bike fixing knowledge, and a multi-tool is super handy. You should learn how to fix a flat if possible, and carry extra inner tubes. You should carry the extra inner tubes no matter, because then if you can sort of figure it out as you go, but you need the new tube. You can visit your local bike shop and ask for a crash course. They might help you out there. And usually a lot of bike shops also offer classes, as do bicycle coalitions. AAA, I mentioned that here because in some states, AAA drivers are equipped with things to help cyclists fix their bike. So if you're in a jam and you can't help yourself, and you have cell service, AAA could help you out. It's good to have some basic skills, or to have somebody to call. So on the ride, everyone carries their own gear, water, snacks. It's part of taking ownership of the experience. The boys here are like little specks to me at the top of this hill. They're so far away. We've ridden so much together over the years that they just intuitively know when to stop and wait for us to catch up. But it's important to articulate your expectations about this, because you don't want them to be just happily riding along, having no idea that you are super nervous about the fact that you haven't seen them in a little while. So talk about trail spacing, how far apart you're comfortable getting, and how you're going to communicate that with each other. In the very beginning, my husband and I would bookend the boys, but they quickly became faster than us, and we didn't want to hold them back. So now they are always leading the way. Although on the White Rim Trail, the last day of that trip, I was really struggling, and they made the decision to have me be in front, because they didn't want me to fall behind without them realizing. And so that was helpful. So I took the lead and they followed. It's important to have regular conversations with them about how you guys are spaced out on the trail. So everyone rides their own ride. You may be having a super great time, feeling amazing and loving life on this bike trip, but maybe someone in your family is not feeling that way. Everyone is dealing with different aches, pains, and moods, and you can't be their cheerleader. They have to dig deep and figure out a way to get through it. And it's an important part of biking a long distance, and it's a good thing to go through as a family, to talk about how you're feeling, and to support each other. But you're doing it, they're each doing it on their own, and at the end of the day, that's a really good thing. So bike trips can be tough, but they should be fun. And when you're biking a lot. You should eat as much as you want and what you want. And this first photo was taken at a grocery store that we stopped at before we were heading to Grand Manan. Our younger son wasn't sure if we'd find marshmallows on Grand Manan, and he couldn't risk it. So he went in and got these super mega marshmallows, and I just don't even understand why such a thing needs to exist. But he wanted them, and he carried them on outside of his pack there, and he was thrilled, and that's what's important. And each night on Grand Manan, he made these sandwiches with Chips Ahoy cookies and these super mega marshmallows. And I think the patent is still pending on that one, but it's important to make sure that everyone is well fed on the ride. And remember, it's an adventure and things go wrong, and that's okay. It's part of it. This trip, this was on the C&O towpath trip. We knew that that the towpath was going to be closed at the Paw Paw Tunnel, and we had heard it was going to be. We had heard that the workaround was no picnic, is how it was described to us. And I think that would be an accurate description if it was like a 50-degree day, but it happened to be in the 80s that day, and it was so hot, and we had to push our bikes up. This photo does not do the hill justice. It's just this hill. And it was rough and hot, and but we got to the top of the hill, and we had this beautiful overlook looking over the river, and my younger son said, oh, well, if we hadn't had to do this, we wouldn't get this great view, which was really nice attitude to have. I didn't exactly share it at the time, but I'm glad that he did. And then this trip was the same C&O towpath trip, was heavy on the adventure. We stayed in this lovely little shack that's called the chicken coop, which you can kind of understand why. It's this 3-sided shelter. And we brought our 30-degree sleeping bags with us for this trip in April. And it turns out April in Maryland is the month of all seasons. And it got down to 30 degrees that night, and a 30-degree bag will keep you alive in 30-degree weather, but not comfortable in 30-degree weather. And so this is a trip that we look back on fondly, but it wasn't easy at all. And but just because things go wrong doesn't mean the trip is ruined. It's part of the adventure. So you're interesting when you're traveling with gear on your bicycle, and that's true. People are interested in you. And one of the great things about bike travel is meeting people along the way and connecting with the communities that you're biking through. And this first photo is taken at this peach farm in Quebec that we encountered this farmer, and he gave us this unexpected hour-long tour of his family's peach farm. And it was educational and delicious and lovely, and it was a really neat part of that trip that we could never have planned. But say hi to people who say hi to you and talk with them, and you never know what you're gonna learn on a bike trip. And the second photo is at the Post Office Pizza on Grand Manan. And we stopped in there on the end of a day that we had biked to the other side of the island to take a look at these beautiful cliffs. And it was a 20-mile ride one way and then 20 miles back. And when we got to the Post Office Pizza that evening, the owner said, oh, I've been thinking about you. I saw you biking out in the morning, and I was wondering how you were doing, and I was hoping you'd stop in. And it's pretty neat to think that locals are paying attention to you when you're biking. And it's nice to learn about the place that you're visiting. Of course, I touched briefly on this before, but it bears repeating. The most important thing on a bike trip is to stay safe, wear a properly fitted helmet and bright clothing. Always use lights. Check your brakes and the tires every day and just kind of look over your bike and make sure everything is how it should be. And make sure that everybody knows the rules of traffic and that you all stick together and obey the rules. Bike travelers promote bike travel, and so it's good to set a good example. Riding safe on the road is part of that. Practicing leave no trace is part of that. Spend money at local shops as much as you can and connect with local people. It's good to show communities that bike travel is good for them. And take notes. So much happens during the course of a week-long ride, and it all goes by so quickly. I keep a small notebook to record things at the end of the day, because otherwise I'll forget. I write down memorable quotes when I can, and they're often very funny later. We usually create a family photo contest on these trips, because all of our trips are just so scenic and beautiful, and so it's a fun way to sort of have everybody involved in taking pictures, and then we get to look at them when we get back and compare all of our beautiful photographs. And these are just a few of my favorite trips, but the list of our to-do list is far, far longer than the list of trips that we have done. Each time we go on a trip, we get ideas for more future trips, and it's terrific. There's no end to it. So I hope that you've learned something here that you can use when you plan your own bike trip. Feel free to reach out anytime with questions or just to talk about something that you're planning. I love to talk about bike trips, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks so much.